the long decline of Byzantium for over a millennium, the Byzantine Empire stood as the last surviving continuation of the ancient Roman world. Centered in the magnificent city of Constantinople, it was a beacon of Orthodox Christianity, a hub of global trade, and the guardian of classical knowledge. Yet by the 15th century, the once great empire had shrunk to little more than the walls of its capital. Understanding how Constantinople ended up isolated and vulnerable requires looking back at centuries of slow decline and the pivotal events that weakened Byzantium beyond repair. The seeds of collapse were planted long before the final siege of 1453. From the 11th century onward, Byzantium faced continuous pressure from multiple directions. The Seljuk Turks defeated the empire at Manzikert in 1071, shattering Byzantine control over Anatolia's heartland for manpower and revenue. This loss forced the empire into political instability and economic stress. Rival claimants to the throne, weak emperors, and ambitious generals plunged the empire into cycles of civil war that drained resources and undermined central authority. Although the empire briefly recovered under the Comnenian dynasty, the 12th century introduced new challenges. The Crusades, originally called by Western Christians to aid Byzantium against Turkish threats, brought both cooperation and tension. While some Crusader armies acted as allies, others were difficult to control, and their mere presence strained Byzantine diplomacy. The relationship worsened drastically in 1204. When the Fourth Crusade, manipulated by Venice, attacked Constantinople itself, the Crusaders sacked the city, looted its treasures, massacred civilians, and established a short-lived Latin empire on Byzantine lands. The sack of 1204 was one of the most devastating events in medieval history. Priceless works of art, manuscripts, relics, and treasures accumulated over centuries were shipped to Western Europe or destroyed. The cultural, economic, and psychological damage to Byzantium was enormous. Although the Byzantines eventually reclaimed their city in 1261, the empire that returned was only a shadow of its former self. Its population had declined, its economy was crippled, and its political structure remained fractured. Rival Greek successor states, foreign mercenaries, and dependency on Italian maritime powers further limited recovery. From the mid-13th to the 15th century, Byzantium lost territory piece by piece. Serbian and Bulgarian kingdoms in the Balkans grew powerful. Italian trading cities like Genoa and Venice dominated the empire's commerce, extracting heavy economic concessions. Internal disputes weakened imperial unity even further. The Palaiologos dynasty, which restored the empire in 1261, was plagued by internal family conflicts and external threats that constantly demanded compromise. Meanwhile, in Asia Minor, a new threat rose: the Ottoman Turks. Emerging in the early 14th century from the fragments of the Seljuk and Mongol power structures, the Ottomans expanded rapidly under a succession of capable sultans. Their administrative efficiency, military innovation, and religious motivation made them a formidable force. By 1400, most of Anatolia and large portions of the Balkans were under Ottoman rule. Constantinople became an island surrounded by a growing empire. Despite its dire situation, Byzantium still managed moments of resistance and diplomacy. The empire played major powers against each other: Hungary, Venice, Genoa, and even the rising Mongols, to delay Ottoman expansion. Yet every temporary solution faded as the Ottomans consolidated power. By the time Mehmed II ascended the Ottoman throne in 1451, Constantinople was completely isolated. The empire now consisted only of the capital, the Peloponnesian despot, which was itself weak and rebellious, and a few scattered territories. Politically, Byzantium suffered from a deep divide between supporters and opponents of church, union with the Roman Catholic Church. Desperate for help against the Ottomans, Emperor John VIII attempted to reconcile with the papacy. Signing the Union of Florence in 1439, many Byzantines, however, opposed this union fiercely, believing it compromised their Orthodox faith for uncertain Western aid. In the end, the agreement achieved little. Most Western kingdoms were preoccupied with their own wars, such as the 100 Years' War, or lacked the resources and will to intervene in the East. The help that did come, mostly small groups of soldiers from Genoa and Venice, was too little, too late. Economically, the empire was bankrupt. Trade revenue flowed primarily to Venetian and Genoese merchants, who controlled key ports. Taxes were insufficient to maintain a strong military. The imperial government had to rely on mercenaries and foreign commanders whose loyalty was uncertain. Constantinople's population had shrunk dramatically from over 500,000 in its golden age to perhaps 50,000 by 1453. Thus, when the Ottoman Empire set its sights on Constantinople, the city was no longer the mighty capital of old. It remained strategically important and symbolically powerful, but it lacked the military, economic, and diplomatic capacity to defend itself effectively. The fall of Constantinople was not a sudden catastrophe. It was the culmination of centuries of erosion, fragmentation, and misfortune. Prevent Byzantine resupply from the Black Sea, and impose heavy tolls on passing ships. The speed and engineering precision of the construction showcased the efficiency of the Ottoman state. Mehmed's military reforms were equally significant. He expanded the Janissary Corps, an elite infantry force composed primarily of Devshirme recruits, Christian boys taken from the Balkans and trained from childhood to serve as loyal soldiers. The Janissaries were disciplined, well-organized, and equipped with the latest firearms. Their training emphasized unity, courage, and absolute obedience to the Sultan. This made them one of the most feared military units in the world. Constantinople and the last emperor, while the Ottoman Empire prepared for conquest. Life inside Constantinople was marked by a strange mixture of hope, fear, and resignation. The city, once home to hundreds of thousands, had dwindled to perhaps 50,000 to 60,000 residents by 1453. Many neighborhoods lay abandoned. Farms encroached upon former urban areas, and ancient monuments stood in quiet ruin. Yet despite decay, Constantinople retained its spiritual prestige. To Orthodox Christians, it was the center of their world, the New Rome. At the head of this diminished empire stood Constantine XI Palaiologos, the last emperor of Byzantium. Born in 1405, Constantine was known for his courage, sense of duty, and military experience. He lacked the resources and manpower of earlier emperors, but he possessed a steadfast determination to defend his city to the very end. When he ascended the throne in 1449, the empire's fate was already sealed, yet he embraced his role with dignity and resolve. Constantine understood that Byzantine survival depended on diplomacy as much as military readiness. He reached out repeatedly to the papacy and Western kingdoms, urging them to send aid against the Ottomans. This led to the controversial Union of Florence, in which Byzantine representatives agreed to reunite the Orthodox and Catholic churches in exchange for military assistance. While the agreement was never widely accepted by the Byzantine population, Constantine upheld it, hoping it would encourage Western intervention. However, help from the West was minimal. The papacy, dealing with internal issues, offered only symbolic support. Venice and Genoa, traditional maritime powers in the region, were reluctant to commit forces without clear political advantage. Europe was preoccupied with its own conflicts, most notably the final years of the Hundred Years' War. By the time the Ottomans advanced, only a few hundred Genoese soldiers under Giovanni Giustiniani arrived to assist the defense. Their presence improved morale, but they were far too few to alter the balance of power. Inside the city, preparations for the siege were intense, but hampered by limited resources. The defenders repaired the aging Theodosian walls, cleared fields of fire, and stored supplies. The Golden Horn, the harbor on the northern side of the city, was blocked by a massive chain stretching across its entrance defense mechanism. It had successfully deterred hostile fleets for centuries. The defenders of Constantinople were a heterogeneous group. Alongside Byzantine soldiers were Genoese and Venetian volunteers. Local militias, priests, monks, and ordinary citizens determined to protect their homes. One of the key figures in the city's defense was Giustiniani, the Genoese military commander whose leadership and expertise in fortification were invaluable. Constantine entrusted him with the most critical section of the land walls, personally fighting alongside him. Their partnership symbolized the best cooperation Byzantium could muster at the end of its days. Daily life during the siege preparations was tense yet determined. Church services became more frequent, and clergy encouraged the population to remain resolute. Many citizens sought spiritual solace, praying in the great Hagia Sophia, the magnificent cathedral built by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century. The ancient structure had seen countless events, but now it stood as the final sanctuary for an empire on the brink. Despite the gravity of the situation, some within the city clung to the belief that Constantinople's legendary walls would hold, as they had for centuries. The Theodosian walls, with their triple-layered defenses, towers, and strategic design, had repelled Persians, Arabs, Bulgarians, Rus, and even Crusaders. Many Byzantines believed that as long as the walls stood, God would protect the city. But a few understood the harsh reality. The invention of gunpowder had changed warfare forever. The massive cannons Mehmed II assembled could tear through the thickest fortifications, and unlike earlier sieges, this time the Ottomans controlled both land and sea approaches. The city was completely isolated. In the final weeks before the siege began, Constantine XI walked the ramparts, visited soldiers, inspected defenses, and spoke with civilians. His presence inspired loyalty and admiration. Those who met him described him as calm but resolute, aware that he would likely die defending his city. For Constantine, surrender was never an option. The fate of an empire rested on his shoulders, and he intended to uphold the honor of Byzantium to the last. Thus, as winter gave way to spring in 1453, the stage was set. Constantinople, weakened, yet unbroken, prepared for its final ordeal. The opposite side. Mehmed II's vast army advanced with relentless momentum. The two forces, representing the last flicker of the medieval world and the rising might of the early modern era, were about to collide in a confrontation that would reshape the course of history. The siege and the breaking of the walls, the siege of Constantinople, began on April 6, 1453, as the first Ottoman cannons roared to life. The city trembled under the impact of modern warfare. The defenders, who had long believed in the invincibility of the Theodosian walls, now faced a terrifying new reality. The enemy possessed artillery capable of destroying stone fortifications that had stood for centuries. From the outset, the Ottoman strategy was clear: relentless bombardment. Massive cannons, including Urban's monstrous bombard, were placed at key points along the land walls. Each shot sent shockwaves through the city, blasting holes into the outer defenses. The sound alone demoralized defenders unused to such overwhelming firepower. Yet the Byzantines responded with remarkable resilience. Every night, teams of workers, soldiers, and citizens rushed to repair damaged sections of the wall. They filled breaches with rubble, earth, wooden planks, and whatever materials they could find. The defenders operated with astonishing coordination. Guided by Giustiniani's expertise and fortification, their ability to repair the walls each night frustrated Ottoman expectations of a quick victory. The naval situation was equally tense. On the first day of the siege, a small Venetian fleet managed to slip through the Ottoman ships and enter the Golden Horn, boosting morale inside the city. However, Mehmed II's blockade soon tightened. To completely seal off the harbor, the Ottomans attempted repeated attacks against the Great Chain protecting the Golden Horn. These early attempts were unsuccessful. The chain held firm. Mehmed then devised one of the most famous maneuvers in military history. On the night of April 22nd, he ordered dozens of small ships to be dragged over land along wooden tracks, greased with oil, across the hills behind Galata. By dawn, more than 70 Ottoman vessels had been moved from the Bosphorus into the Golden Horn, bypassing the chain completely. The defenders were stunned. Ottoman ships now threatened the northern sea walls, and the once secure harbor was no longer safe. Inside the city, panic spread, but the defenders adapted quickly. They constructed floating barricades, built new defensive positions along the shore, and used fire ships to attack the newly entered Ottoman fleet. Although these efforts caused some damage, they could not reverse the strategic setback. Throughout April and May, Mehmed launched several major assaults on the city. The Janissaries, renowned for their discipline and bravery, led attacks on vulnerable points along the walls. The defenders repelled each offensive with arrows, crossbow bolts, boiling oil, and handheld firearms. Even with fewer numbers, Byzantine and Genoese soldiers held their own. But the constant cannon fire gradually weakened the walls. The area near the Gate of St. Romanus, defended by Giustiniani and Constantine XI, was hit repeatedly and became the focal point of the siege. Craters opened in the masonry, towers crumbled, and the land walls began to resemble a broken shell. Mehmed grew impatient. He offered Constantine generous terms of surrender. The emperor could leave with his people unharmed if he yielded the city. Constantine famously refused, declaring that surrender was impossible because the city belonged not to him but to God and its people. Mehmed then resolved to take the city by force. As May drew to a close, the situation became desperate for the Byzantines. Supplies dwindled, morale wavered, and exhaustion set in. On May 28th, Constantine ordered a final procession inside Hagia Sophia. Citizens, soldiers, clergy, and even political rivals gathered together for what they knew could be their last night. After centuries of religious division, Orthodox and Catholic believers took communion side by side. This moment of unity became one of the most poignant scenes in Byzantine history. Outside the walls, Mehmed prepared for the decisive assault. He inspected his troops, organized formations, and encouraged his commanders. Cannon fire intensified throughout the day. By evening, the city shook under continuous bombardment. Fires erupted, smoke filled the air, and the defenders braced themselves for the inevitable clash. The final assault began in the early hours of May 29th, under the cover of darkness. Mehmed divided his forces into several waves. The first wave consisted of irregular troops sent to exhaust the defenders. The second wave, made of Anatolian soldiers, pressed the attack more systematically. But the decisive blow came from the Janissaries. As dawn approached, a section of the wall near the gate of St. Romanus finally collapsed. At the same time, an overlooked postern gate called Karacaporta was accidentally left open. Ottoman soldiers discovered the gap and poured into the city. They climbed onto the walls, raised the Ottoman flag, and caused panic among the defenders. Giustiniani was gravely wounded and forced to withdraw. His departure shattered Byzantine morale. Constantine XI fought valiantly, but was overwhelmed. With the collapse of the defense at St. Romanus and the breach at Karacaporta, the fate of Constantinople was sealed. The fall of the city, when the Ottomans breached the walls on the morning of May 29, 1453, centuries of Byzantine history converged into a single moment of chaos, valor, and tragedy.
Ow.
As the Janissaries surged into the city, the defenders struggled to regroup. The collapse of the defense was rapid and irreversible. Constantine XI, realizing the battle was lost, removed his imperial regalia to fight as a common soldier. According to tradition, he declared, "The city has fallen, but I still live." Determined to die with honor, he plunged into the thick of battle. Its exact fate remains unknown, no definitive body was ever found, but contemporary accounts agree that he fell while fighting near the gate of St. Romanus. With his death, the line of Roman emperors that stretched back over 1,000 years came to an end. As Ottoman forces spread throughout the city, resistance collapsed. Some pockets of soldiers made desperate last stands. Others fled into churches, towers, or underground cisterns. Civilians rushed to Hagia Sophia, believing the sacred space would provide refuge. For generations, a prophecy had circulated that angels would protect the city in its darkest hour. But no supernatural salvation came. When Ottoman soldiers entered Hagia Sophia, they found thousands of men, women, and children huddled inside. As the great doors were breached, the crowd broke into panic. Priests continued leading liturgies until the very moment soldiers stormed the sanctuary. Within hours, the cathedral was transformed into a mosque change that symbolized the passing of one world and the rise of another. Looting, a customary practice in medieval warfare, began and lasted for much of the day. Soldiers seized valuables, enslaved captives, and claimed property. Mehmed II eventually restored order, declaring that the city was his new capital. Unlike some conquerors, Mehmed took steps to preserve, rather than destroy, the city's remaining structures. He recognized Constantinople's immense strategic and cultural value. The Sultan entered Hagia Sophia in the afternoon and ordered its conversion into a mosque, marking the beginning of a new era. Mehmed also issued decrees to protect the city's surviving population. He invited Christians, Jews, and Muslims alike to settle in the revitalized capital. He appointed Gennadius Scholarius as the new Patriarch of Constantinople, granting the Orthodox Church a level of autonomy under Ottoman rule. These actions helped stabilize the city and ensured its revival as a cosmopolitan metropolis. While the Ottomans celebrated, the rest of Europe responded with shock and grief. News of the city's fall spread slowly, but caused intense reaction. Many Christian rulers lamented the loss of the Eastern Roman Empire, but had been too divided or preoccupied to prevent it. The fall of Constantinople became a symbol of Europe's vulnerability and the growing power of the Ottoman Empire. For the Byzantines who survived, the fall meant displacement, loss of homeland, and the end of an era. Many intellectuals fled to Italy, carrying with them manuscripts, knowledge of ancient Greek, and expertise in philosophy, science, and literature. This movement of scholars greatly enriched the Italian Renaissance, contributing to a revival of classical learning that helped reshape Western civilization. Although the city's fall was catastrophic for the Byzantines, it was also a turning point that transformed global history. The Ottoman Empire, energized by its victory, became one of the most powerful states in the world, dominating southeastern Europe, Western Asia, and northern Africa for centuries. Constantinople, renamed Istanbul, became a center of art, culture, administration, and trade.
Ow.
The fall of Constantinople also indirectly motivated European exploration. With Ottoman control over the major land routes to Asia, Western kingdoms sought alternative paths for trade and expansion. This desire eventually led to the voyages of explorers such as Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama, opening the door to the Age of Discovery and the birth of the modern world. By the end of May 29th, the city that had once been the heart of Byzantium had truly changed hands. The sound of church bells gave way to the call of the muezzin. The empire that had preserved Roman law, Greek philosophy, and Christian theology was gone, but its legacy endured in architecture, literature, religion, and the Renaissance that followed. Global consequences and the birth of a new era, the fall of Constantinople, was not merely the end of a city or an empire. It was the end of an age. The collapse of Byzantium and the rise of the Ottoman Empire reshaped political, cultural, economic, and religious dynamics across continents. Its impact reached far beyond the walls of the city, altering the trajectory of global history in ways that are still felt today. One of the most immediate consequences was the acceleration of the Age of Exploration. For centuries, Europeans relied on overland routes through the Middle East and Central Asia for trade with India and China. With the Ottomans controlling the eastern Mediterranean and imposing heavy taxes on goods passing through their territory, European states sought new pathways to the riches of the East. This led to a surge of maritime exploration financed by Portugal and Spain. Explorers such as Prince Henry the Navigator, Vasco da Gama, and Christopher Columbus embarked on voyages that would open new continents, expand global trade, and initiate profound cultural exchanges, some peaceful, others tragic. The fall also dramatically boosted the spread of Renaissance ideas. As Byzantine scholars fled westward, they brought with them manuscripts of ancient Greek texts that had been preserved for centuries in Constantinople. These included works by Plato, Aristotle, Euclid, Galen, and many others. European scholars, thirsty for knowledge, eagerly absorbed these materials. The arrival of Byzantine intellectuals enriched Italian universities, influenced humanist thought, and helped ignite scientific and artistic revolutions. The Renaissance, already underway in Italy, gained new momentum from this infusion of classical wisdom. In the Islamic world, the conquest reinforced the Ottoman Empire's status as a major power. Mehmed II adopted the title Kaiser-i-Rom, meaning Caesar of Rome, asserting his claim as the legitimate successor to the Roman emperors. Under his rule and that of his successors, Istanbul became the heart of a vast and multi-ethnic empire spanning 3 continents. The Ottomans embraced administrative sophistication, architectural innovation, and cultural synthesis. The city transformed into one of the world's great capitals. Blending Byzantine heritage with Islamic art and Ottoman grandeur, religious dynamics also shifted profoundly. For Eastern Orthodox Christians, the fall of Constantinople was both a catastrophe and a turning point. The Orthodox Church lost its political protector, but gained a new kind of autonomy under the Ottomans. The Patriarch of Constantinople became not only a religious leader, but also an administrative head of the Orthodox Millet, responsible for governing Christian communities throughout the empire. This arrangement allowed Orthodoxy to survive and even flourish under Ottoman rule. For Western Europe, the fall triggered deep anxiety about Islamic expansion. Many saw the Ottoman victory as a divine punishment for Europe's sins and disunity. Calls for new crusades were raised, though few materialized. The fall of Constantinople became a rallying cry for unity among Christian monarchs, though such unity proved elusive. Culturally, the fall left a legacy of myths, legends, and prophecies that persisted for centuries. The story of Constantine XI's heroic final stand became a symbol of national pride for Greeks, who later wove it into their struggle for independence in the 19th century. Folklore claimed that the last emperor never died, but was turned into marble and would one day return to liberate the city. Such narratives preserved Byzantine identity long after the empire's fall. Economically, the shift in trade routes spurred transformations across Europe. The establishment of maritime empires by Spain and Portugal led to global colonization and the rise of the Atlantic economy. Northern Europe's commercial centers Antwerp, Amsterdam, and London eclipsed Mediterranean powers. The fall of Constantinople also marked the beginning of the early modern era. Historians often cite 1453 as a key turning point in world history. It represented the end of medieval feudal structures, the rise of centralized monarchies. and the emergence of modern warfare based on gunpowder and artillery. The Ottoman victory demonstrated that traditional stone fortresses could no longer withstand cannon fire, prompting military architects to develop new styles of fortification. Finally, the fall reshaped global geopolitics. The Ottomans became a dominant force in Europe for centuries, influencing diplomacy, warfare, and alliances. Their presence shaped the formation of modern Eastern Europe and the Middle East, leaving legacies that still influence politics today. In essence, the fall of Constantinople was an event whose consequences reverberated far beyond the city's walls. It ended a civilization, launched new eras of exploration and cultural flowering, and reshaped global power structures. It remains one of history's most dramatic turning points, a moment when an old world faded and a new one began.